041, one game conquers the fans of the Black Lions. You are listening at novelfull.audio. They scored again. Fred blurted out, then paused, frowning. Wait, why did I say, again, that the Paderborn fans were devastated? What the heck is going on? Meanwhile, the Munich 1860 faithful were still chanting, Tong Yi's gotta go. Did Schubert really have the nerve to keep coaching Paderborn? Should they start yelling, fire Schubert? Paderborn fans were beyond mad. Some couldn't take it anymore and stormed out. Paderborn's head coach, Schubert, was completely wrecked. This game was a nightmare. He'd been looking forward to his big break, a chance to dominate. Instead, right from the start, Tong Yi had plunged a knife into his heart, leaving him ice-cold, seriously brutal. Schubert felt a bone-chilling cold creep into his hands and feet. Now, remembering his smugness before the game, he felt ridiculous. He couldn't help but glance at the Munich 1860. Contact, his eyes fixed on the Chinese guy, a burning resentment inside. He'd been played by this damn Chinese guy. The guy was a snake. Now he was convinced Tong Yi had thrown the preseason warm-up match on purpose. What a cunning old fox. He clenched his fists, his gaze locked on Tong Yi, hatred practically cracking his teeth. Okay, I was too cocky this time. I was blind and I misjudged you. I'll admit defeat, but I won't fall for it again. I'm gonna make you pay, big time. Schubert thought to himself, there'd be plenty of chances. They had 2 league games coming up. Just wait, Chinese guy. You're gonna pay the price. Schubert took a deep breath, turned sharply, and plopped back down on the bench. He'd given up. He wasn't going to pointlessly struggle through this game. He could see that his players were completely deflated. Munich 1860's relentless pressure had crushed their spirits, making a comeback impossible. What was the point of playing? Seeing Schubert's dejected posture, Sarek sighed and took his own seat. Before the game, he'd repeatedly warned Schubert not to underestimate their opponent, and especially not to underestimate Tong Yi. He had argued that even if the guy had gotten the Munich 1860 job because of his girlfriend, he must have some skills, or Baker wouldn't have approved it, right? But the game was already a disaster, so what could he say? He just hoped Schubert would learn from this and avoid making the same mistakes in the future. Schubert was only 38, still wet behind the ears. No one could deny his youth and arrogance. Once he had a few more experiences, he might mature. Maybe this loss would be a good thing for him, maybe not. Then again, Tong Yi, on the other side of the field, was even younger, only 24. How could he seem so much more mature and cunning than Schubert? Maybe that's what made Tong Yi special. Otherwise, he never would have landed the Munich 1860 gig through a woman. Turns out, even the most successful guys are more complicated than they seem. I mean, there are tons of men in the world, but only a fraction of them really make a mark. And it's even harder to be successful using someone else's resources, so, Tong Yi definitely shouldn't be underestimated. Sarek couldn't help but turn to Schubert again, shaking his head and muttering, "You've still got a lot to learn." Wow! The second half has been way more intense than we expected. Munich 1860's high-pressing game is even more effective than we thought. Paderborn players are cracking under the pressure, making passing errors, and giving up goals. The opponent's counterattacks are just too fast. Klinsmann was at a loss for words. Basically, all 4 of Munich 1860's goals were scored the same way. Yup, Munich 1860's goal right at the start of the second half was another sudden steel and lightning-fast counterattack. Even though Munich 1860 had kicked off the second half, they quickly lost possession. Costa, up front, was pressured by Paderborn defender Strodlik and couldn't control the ball. It bounced to Gunther. As soon as Gunther got the ball, the opponent's forward Lauter swarmed him like a starving dog after a scrap of meat. It was way too fast and too aggressive. Gunther almost immediately lost any space or passing lanes. And his position was critical. If he lost the ball here, the opponent would have a clear shot on goal. He had to pass it back to the keeper, but just as the ball rolled out, Costa blew past him and chased it down. Jensen, the Paderborn goalie, panicked when he saw Costa charging at him. He had no good options and zero confidence in his footwork. Desperate, He just blasted the ball out of there. Of course, in his panic, Jensen shanked the kick, and instead of sending the ball soaring into Munich 1860's half, he sent it straight to Griezmann on the wing. Griezmann chested it down easily and dribbled straight into the Paderborn penalty area. Strodlik immediately went after Griezmann. Griezmann faked a shot and instead slid the ball between Strodlik's legs to Lauter. Gunther was shocked and quickly tried to block Lauter, denying him the shot. Lauter, under heavy pressure, was off balance. He smartly gave up on the shot, pretending to kick but letting the ball roll through. Gunther didn't see it coming and could only watch the ball roll past him. The fullback had been drawn away by De Bruyne, leaving a massive gap behind Gunther. Spotting the open lane, the unmarked Costa swept the ball into the far corner of the net, 4-0. Just 2 minutes into the second half, Munich 1860 scored again, with Costa getting the goal. Costa was ecstatic. He spun around and sprinted to Tong Yi on the sideline, hugging him tightly and thanking him for bringing him from Spain to Germany and giving him a starting spot. He dedicated the goal to Tong Yi, saying, "Boss, you're the best." "Thank you." The Munich 1860 players rushed over and mobbed Tong Yi again. It was obvious that Tong Yi still commanded a lot of respect from the players. The fans in the stands were scratching their heads. Wasn't Tong Yi supposed to be useless? Weren't all the training sessions run by other coaches? Why were these players so supportive of Tong Yi? Jacob's face in the stands was turning green. That's not how the script was supposed to go. What was happening? Was this lucky guy just getting away with it again? Little Hoffmann, like Schubert, was having a meltdown. How was this possible? How could Munich 1860 have built such a huge lead? How could Tong Yi be so effective? Wasn't he just a figurehead? Didn't other coaches handle all the training? Wait a minute, that's right. Other coaches did handle the training. This victory had nothing to do with Tong Yi. Exactly. Even if Munich 1860 won, it wouldn't be because of Tong Yi. Little Hoffmann glared at Tong Yi, feeling nothing but contempt. The guy was a clown. He also cursed Martina in his head. That woman had recruited so many people to hype up Tong Yi. What a manipulative shrew. Clearly, you couldn't trust an entrepreneur. Little Hoffmann gave Tong Yi a cold, sarcastic look, just waiting to expose Tong Yi's act. Let him have his moment. They'd expose him after the game. 042, our goal is to upgrade the Bundesliga. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The Allianz Arena's press conference room buzzed with excitement, packed to the rafters. Jacob sat, scowling. He'd never imagined things would turn out this way. Why had this normally soft-hearted guy suddenly become so tough? Could those 5 straight losses in the warm-up games have been some kind of act? He refused to believe it. How could this 24-year-old Chinese guy be so good? Did he even know football? But today's 8-0 shellacking was undeniably real. If this so-called softy didn't know football, then what about Schubert? Was this a slap in the face to every German out there? His expression twisted back and forth, resentment building up inside him. It was driving him crazy. It was all that damn bastard's fault. Yep, the first round of the German Cup was over. Munich 1860 had just demolished Paderborn 8-0 on their home turf, leaving them utterly humiliated. Hamann and Paderborn's own centre-back, Strodlik, scored the last 2 goals. Paderborn was completely crushed. Paderborn fans had streamed out of the stadium long before the final whistle. It was a humiliating defeat. I can't believe Munich 1860, who looked so awful in the warm-ups, just showed their true colors in the real match. How do you think this Chinese guy, Tong Yi, did it? Hannah asked, approaching Jacob with a questioning look. Jacob glared at Hannah. Who said that victory had anything to do with that freeloader? He snapped. Hannah's eyes widened, her gaze intense. What are you getting at? Jacob scoffed. Didn't you hear little Hoffmann saying that Tong Yi's assistants are doing all the training? What does that have to do with him? Hannah looked shocked. You're saying Tong Yi's just a puppet, and his assistants are the ones really calling the shots? But if that's the case, why would his assistants want Tong Yi to get all the credit? That doesn't make any sense. Jacob sneered, a hint of envy in his voice. Who said a freeloader can't be useful? Get yourself a sugar mama, and you could do it too. Hannah gasped, nodding slowly. Sure enough, money makes the world go round. Just then, the room fell silent. The head coaches from both teams walked into the press conference hall. Reporters instantly quieted down, staring intently at the podium. To be fair, Schubert hadn't just run off after such a devastating loss. Staying for the post-game press conference showed some class. Detrick, the news manager, announced, "All right, let's begin the press conference for Munich 1860 versus Paderborn after the first round of the German Cup." First, the head coaches gave their takes on the game. Schubert started, "First, I want to apologize to our fans. The responsibility for this loss lies entirely with me, not with my players. I underestimated Munich 1860 and David. Of course, their warm-up results were also misleading." The reporters nodded, agreeing with Schubert. "This Tong Yi was playing games," Schubert continued. "Honestly, on paper, the difference between us and Munich 1860 isn't as wide as the score suggests. You could even argue we're the stronger team. We lost because of my tactical decisions and underestimating Munich 1860's tactics. These are my mistakes. I'll analyze them thoroughly. Next time we face Munich 1860, we won't let this happen again. We'll win." Schubert sounded confident and clear. The media applauded, showing their respect for Schubert's resilience. Then it was Tong Yi's turn. "First, I want to thank my players. This victory is entirely due to them, not me." Why did that sound so familiar? Reporters glanced at Schubert, sitting near Tong Yi. They gasped, was he using Schubert's words to mock him? Slapping him in the face in public? Schubert turned pale. Tong Yi continued smoothly, "My players showed their strength and performed exceptionally well. This helped us shake off the shadow of those 5 consecutive losses, which is crucial. Today, the applause belongs to my players. They were the best." These two coaches were similar, both quick to protect their teams. Tong Yi added, "Of course, our opponent, Paderborn, also played well and showed their strength. They just had bad luck. I believe they'll turn things around in the league and get the wins they deserve." Schubert was livid. Was Tong Yi praising them? This was just a backhanded compliment. Was he implying their strength was only good for losing 8-0? Schubert wanted to shut Tong Yi up. Tong Yi concluded, "Let me say it again, the credit for this game belongs to my players. They're the biggest reason we won. I'm very grateful to them." More applause followed. The media was impressed. Tong Yi was a tough cookie, and his subtle jabs were perfectly delivered. After speaking, Tong Yi smiled at Schubert and nodded. Schubert looked ready to explode. His face was a chameleon of red, white, green, and purple. Tong Yi thought to himself, he's got a long way to go before he learns to control his emotions. That would Schubert spontaneously combust if he knew what Tong Yi was thinking. Jacob watched with a cold eye, thinking, the villain prevails. Meanwhile, the other reporters snapped photos and recorded everything. The press conference moved into the queue. Reporters eagerly raised their hands. Schubert randomly called on a reporter. It was his turn to face the music. The reporter asked, "Mr. Schubert, why did Paderborn lose today? We all know Munich 1860 isn't that strong, and Paderborn isn't weak." Schubert's face darkened. This was rubbing salt in the wound. "The responsibility for the loss is mine," Schubert said coldly. "I made mistakes in my tactical decisions." He selected another reporter, who asked, "How do you rate your opponent, Coach Tong Yi?" Schubert was even angrier. "He did a good job today," he said. "But I'll say this, I'll win next time." Schubert quickly called on the last reporter. Given the time constraints, the reporter asked, "Do you think Coach Tong Yi can fulfill the March agreement and lead the team to the top of the Bundesliga?" Schubert sneered. "The professional league isn't that simple. Anyone who underestimates it will be crushed by it. Besides, Munich 1860 isn't very strong. With their lineup, they'll be lucky to avoid relegation." Schubert finally had a chance to strike back, his words dripping with disdain. Applause broke out as the reporters thanked Schubert. Ending his session, Schubert stood up immediately, ignoring Tong Yi. He wasn't going to stick around and watch Tong Yi gloat, he'd hit and run, giving Tong Yi no chance to retaliate. Let's see how Tong Yi liked that. Watching Schubert's hasty exit, Tong Yi smirked and called on a reporter at random. The short-haired Christian was targeted again. The media was annoyed. This was blatant favoritism. Christian jumped right in. First, congratulations on the win, Mr. Tong Yi. What do you think was key to winning today's game? And what impact will this have in the future? Two questions at once. Tong Yi smiled slightly. As I said, the victory was thanks to our players. Their hard work made it possible. They're all great. As for the impact on the future, it's obviously positive. This win will rebuild our confidence and give us the belief to challenge for the league. It's a good start. Jacob and the others looked on with disbelief. This Chinese guy was so full of it. Tong Yi called on another reporter, avoiding Jacob, Hannah, and the others on purpose. Each time he picked someone, he'd glance at them with a contemptuous smile. The two were furious. The reporter was excited. Mr. Tong Yi, how did you adjust the team after 5 straight losses? Their strength today was incredible. Tong Yi replied, it's due to the team's unity. Those 5 losses were expected, as we were training and adapting to new tactics. There will be growing pains and lessons learned when starting from scratch. While we haven't fully integrated yet, we've made progress, which is why we won. Tong Yi called on another reporter. Jacob, Hannah, and the others looked even more furious. They were being ignored. The reporter asked, Mr. Tong Yi, are you confident in completing the March agreement and leading Munich 1860 to the top of the Bundesliga by the end of September? Tong Yi nodded firmly. Absolutely. I've never doubted it, even during those 5 losses. I believe in my tactics and, more importantly, in my players. If we stick together, reaching the top of the Bundesliga will be easy. I'll say it again, our goal this season is promotion to the Bundesliga. 043, the most shameless thief in German football. You are listening at NovelsThe 8-0. Munich 1860 absolutely massacres Paderborn at home. Munich Sport. Unbelievable. The Black Lions bounce back, crush Paderborn with 8 goals. Berlin Morning Post. Tong Yi, Bundesliga promotion is our goal. Ruhr Daily News. After 5 straight losses, Munich 1860 roars back with an 8-goal blowout. Munich Daily News. 8-0. Munich 1860 advances to the second round of the German Cup. Munich Aftenposten. Schubert, we only beat ourselves, we'll get M next time. Rheinische Post. Youth explosion. Black Lions 18-year-olds combine for 5 goals. Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Outstanding. Belgian teen scores hat-trick at just 18. Hamburg Morning Post. A star is born. Munich 1860's dynamic duo, both 18, light up the scoreboard. Cologne Sport. Rise or return to glory. Black Lions claw out 8-goal victory. Daily Mail. Coach Wanfan stands strong as Munich 1860 annihilates Paderborn. Leipzig Wengazeitung. Tough coach credits players for the win. Kicker. Breaking. Black Lions win, under fire coach keeps his job. Leipzig Volkszeitung. The German media went wild after Munich's stunning 8-0 victory. Frankly, nobody saw this coming. Tong Yi actually led the team to such a massive win, it was almost too much to believe. Even the fans were doing a double take when they saw the headlines. Weren't Munich 1860 getting hammered in their warm-up games? Then, out of nowhere, they explode in the main event. An 8-0 thrashing of Paderborn, a team on their level. It seemed unreal. But the facts were staring them right in the face. They were all stunned. The question everyone was asking, what does this guy bring to the table to lead such a talented team? The Munich 1860 faithful were especially eager to know, how did Tong Yi, this supposedly soft-spoken guy, pull off this massive victory? What kind of magic did he work on the team? Their curiosity was through the roof. Truth be told, they hadn't really gotten to know Tong Yi since he joined. All they knew about him came from media reports, and now they felt a little misled. Hadn't the reporters painted him as a clueless guy who slept his way to the top? Someone who was only good at schmoozing women. They said Tong Yi becoming head coach would be the death of Munich 1860, but now, was any of that true? The Munich 1860 fans were full of doubts. Meyer was just as skeptical. He looked uneasy, completely baffled. Logically, a Chinese guy shouldn't know anything about professional soccer, especially a 24-year-old. It just didn't add up. Tong Yi, the guy who allegedly couldn't do anything himself, had just led the team to an 8-0 victory. Could you still say he doesn't understand soccer? Could anyone still claim he's riding someone else's coattails? Meyer was at a loss for words, but swallowing his pride and backing Tong Yi wasn't an option just yet. He'd been at the forefront of the Tong Yi criticism. To suddenly switch sides now would be ridiculous, right? Besides, it was just one game. What if it was a fluke? So, Meyer was still conflicted. "Boss, are we going to keep hammering the coach in the next game?" asked Huang Mao, a guy with glasses. Hesitantly, Meyer frowned, unable to make up his mind. He glanced down at the newspaper in his hand. The article gave a detailed account of the Munich 1860 Paderborn match. Munich 1860 had completely dominated Paderborn from the opening whistle. Paderborn barely had any decent scoring chances. Munich 1860 had just dismantled them, not only on the scoreboard, but on the field too. Paderborn was outplayed in every aspect. Munich 1860 had performed flawlessly. Even some media outlets that had been critical of Tong Yi gave him props, acknowledging he had some skills and that Munich 1860's new tactics were impressive. They were unlike anything else in the Bundesliga, completely unique. They gave Tong Yi some kudos for actually being pretty good. Meyer felt awkward about continuing to criticize him. He pondered for a moment and said, "Let's hold off on the bashing for now. But we're not going to start singing his praises either. Let's wait and see. Let's see if he's the real deal or just a flash in the pan." Huang Mao nodded, understanding completely. Meyer waved his hand, signaling Huang Mao to pass the message to the rest of the team. Huang Mao immediately turned and left. Meyer looked back down at the newspaper, at the photo of Tong Yi raising his arms in celebration surrounded by his players, and thought to himself, "I hope you didn't just get lucky." Yes, deep down, Meyer still wanted Munich 1860 to succeed. Their previous attacks on Tong Yi, all the insults, had been for the good of the team, or so he told himself. If Tong Yi could really lead Munich 1860 to the Bundesliga, Meyer would personally apologize to him in public. I hope I get the chance. Meyer thought to himself. He picked up another newspaper and started reading closely. This paper focused not on Munich 1860's new tactics, but on the two young players who had shown in the game, the team's new number 10. 18-year-old Belgian midfielder De Bruyne, and the new number 17, French forward Griezmann, also just 18. These two youngsters had put on a show, setting the entire German soccer world abuzz. One had a hat trick of assists, the other 2 goals and an assist. Together, they were responsible for 6 goals, not 5 as some media outlets were reporting. The articles praised the 2 young players to the skies. Even Klinsmann had raved about them during the game. Klinsmann said, "These 2 young players really caught my eye. Their performance was outstanding. They're still young and have some growing to do, but I believe they can become global stars if they keep developing like this. I have high hopes for them." Klinsmann wasn't the only one. Many famous figures in German soccer praised the 2 players after watching the game. Even Beckenbauer weighed in, saying, "Honestly, they were the biggest surprise of this round of the German Cup for me. They're both very good, and I especially like De Bruyne. He has the poise of a seasoned pro in midfield, even if he still looks a little green." Many media outlets printed these quotes, and De Bruyne's name was suddenly on everyone's lips in Germany, making many young players green with envy. Dortmund's young coach Klopp also chimed in. To be honest, their performance was unbelievable. To play like that at such a young age is truly rare. And they showed so much maturity in the game. David, you have a real eye for talent, great job. If I could, I'd bring them both to Dortmund. We need players like that. Klopp had already started poaching. To be honest, Meyer was also very impressed by these two young players. Their stellar performance was a real shock. The thought that his home team had unearthed such promising young talent was exhilarating. In fact, as long as these two kids lived up to the hype, he wouldn't even hate Tong Yi, even if he was a complete fraud. Having two geniuses was worth it. Suddenly, Meyer was actually looking forward to Munich 1860's new season. Many Munich 1860 fans shared Meyer's sentiment. This game had softened their stance on Tong Yi, making them feel they'd been too harsh. Some, more radical, fans had even started singing his praises, convinced that Munich 1860 was on the right track and promotion was in the cards, but then, Bild had to rain on their parade. Jacob dropped another bombshell. Tong Yi is the most shameless thief in German soccer, and the biggest phony. Jacob claimed the real mastermind behind Munich 1860 wasn't Tong Yi at all. Tong Yi rarely even showed up at practice, so the team's victory had nothing to do with him. He went on to claim that Munich 1860's tactics were eerily similar to Frank's, only slightly more advanced with a few new wrinkles. Even though Tong Yi was Frank's protégé, he'd only worked with him for 3 years. How could he have possibly grasped Frank's approach so thoroughly and then taken it to the next level? Impossible. He argued that the mastermind behind the tactics was definitely not someone like Tong Yi. It had to be Steckriger and Cruz, Tong Yi's assistants. These two had been with Frank for years, one in charge of offensive training, the other defense. They had a much deeper understanding of Frank's tactics than Tong Yi ever could. So, the tactics of Munich 1860 were probably their creation, not the coach's. Jacob even had evidence. Little Hoffman had come forward to testify. He claimed Tong Yi never participated in training at all. How could he have designed the team's tactics? It was all the work of Steckriger and the others. Tong Yi was stealing their credit just because he had a powerful girlfriend. The news caused an immediate uproar. 044, doesn't he want to see our team? You are listening at NovelsThe. Tong Yi being doubted as the true leader of Munich 1860 wasn't a new thing. Still, it was a major headache. After all, the more you repeat a lie, the more believable it becomes. It's like that old saying, if enough people say they saw a tiger, people will believe it's true. And with little Hoffman constantly stirring the pot, some of the less steadfast fans started to buy into it. Now, the official Munich 1860 website is flooded with comments from people bashing Tong Yi, calling him a glory-stealing thief. Some fans are even demanding that Steckris and Kruger step up, protect their interests, and expose Tong Yi, showing him and his cronies that they can't intimidate everyone with their power or buy them off with favors. They're practically chanting, "We'll always support Steckris." It's starting to sound like the real deal. The more people who jump on this bandwagon, the more doubt it sows. Tong Yi had finally started to turn things around, but these guys were dragging him right back down. The official website remains a war zone of anti-Tong Yi sentiment. Some fans even took their protests offline, holding up signs outside the training grounds, slamming Tong Yi and showing their support for Steckris and the others. Steckris was furious when he saw them. These people couldn't tell up from down and were just blindly following the crowd. Those are the dangerous ones, so easily manipulated and turned into weapons, and now, Jacob and little Hoffman were using them as pawns. Steckris had had enough. He marched right up to the protesters and said, "Listen up, you need to calm down and think for yourselves. Don't let others do your thinking for you. Let me be clear, these new tactics are all Coach Tong Yi's work, period. Everyone on the coaching staff knows this. These tactics are David's brainchild. He doesn't deserve this." The protesters, holding signs that read "Down with the Wimps," stared intently at Steckris, their faces etched with concern. Steckris continued, "Okay, Torben's right about one thing, David doesn't always lead the training sessions in person. But before each session, he meticulously plans out the team's defensive, offensive, and individual training drills, and then hands them off to us, the specialist coaches, to execute. I'm just carrying out the plan. The credit goes to David, and you need to understand that. Hearing this, the protesters started to feel even more sorry for Stekris. Stekris added, and it's not like David's completely hands-off. At critical moments, he steps in, and he's led plenty of training sessions himself. It's not what outsiders are saying at all. In my opinion, David is a young and incredibly talented head coach. You're lucky to have him here at Munich 1860. You should support him and let him become your hero. Suddenly, someone in the crowd choked up and shouted, Coach Stekris, are you being forced to say these things? This isn't the Dark Ages. They can't just hold you hostage like this. It's outrageous. We know they're threatening you and that you can't tell us the truth. Don't worry, give us a signal, and we'll help you. Mr. Stekris, if you're being held against your will, just blink, and we'll know. We'll do everything we can to rescue you. Stekris's face went dark. Were these people out of their minds? Hadn't he made himself clear? Did they not understand English? Or was he speaking Martian? He almost laughed in disbelief. These guys had conjured up a whole movie plot in their heads. Looking at their excited faces, Stekris realized he couldn't reason with them. Taking a deep breath, he suppressed his anger and said, for the last time, I am not being coerced, threatened, or kidnapped. I greatly admire Coach David. He's a brilliant coach. Munich 1860 is lucky to have him. I still hope you can support him because he will be your hero. At that, even more people in the crowd burst into tears. One fan roared, Mr. Stekris, don't do this. We'll get you justice. Stekris's face turned purple. He was speechless. Finally, he managed to say, this is insane. Just go home. You don't need to worry about me. The crowd fell silent, dead silent. After a few seconds, someone yelled miserably, I get it. Stekris is defending the weakling because Martina bribed him with money. The dirty sellout betrayed us, betrayed the truth, and became a slave to money. He's a traitor and a scoundrel. Stekris was so angry he nearly passed out. Were these guys really this dumb? Seriously? Had they been watching too many soap operas? Or spending too much time on internet forums? Where was their common sense? How could they concoct such a ridiculous drama? Stekris scoffed, turned on his heel, and walked away, ignoring them completely. Seeing Stekris return in a rage, Kruger asked with a grin, what's wrong? Didn't your little pep talk go over well? Stekris snapped, don't even get me started. They're a bunch of ignorant, shameless idiots. They really ticked me off. Kruger patted Stekris on the back and said, I told you, ignore them. You can't reason with them. If they had half a brain, they wouldn't have been so easily manipulated by Jacob. Just focus on our jobs and forget about the rest. Stekris was still fuming. They don't even realize they're being used as pawns. They actually accused me of selling out for David's money and becoming a slave to greed. Kruger chuckled. Ha ha ha, don't sweat it. You know they're clueless. Why waste your breath arguing with them? That even so, Stekris was still livid. It took him a while to calm down. The two coaches exchanged a sigh. They never expected Tong Yi to face so much trouble when he joined Munich 1860. They were both worried about Tong Yi and even felt a little guilty. Of course, Tong Yi was oblivious. He was currently in Chairman Baker's office. Grinning, he asked Baker, Mr. Baker, I guess I'm officially staying on as the head coach of Munich 1860, right? Baker was beaming. Absolutely. Who could possibly have a reason to fire you now? Don't worry, you're the head coach of Munich 1860 from here on out. If you actually lead the team to the top of the league in 2 months, then you'll be our head coach for the next 2 years, and I'll give you my full support. Hearing this, Stoffs felt a knot in his stomach. He'd hoped to kick Tong Yi out of Munich 1860 today. Who knew the guy would actually pass the test? Seeing the smug look on Tong Yi's face made him want to explode. This guy was just here to gloat and annoy him. Tong Yi said, Mr. Chairman, don't worry. I will lead Munich 1860 to the top of the league, guaranteed. Baker nodded, increasingly impressed with Tong Yi. At this point, he genuinely felt that Tong Yi might be able to lead the team to the top. He was starting to believe Tong Yi's bold words and immediately said, "Great, I'll be waiting." Stoff's heart sank, and his mood plummeted. In his mind, Tong Yi might actually be able to lead the team to the top of the second Bundesliga. He even had to admit that Tong Yi did possess a certain amount of skill. Now, he was feeling nervous and apprehensive. If Tong Yi actually led the team to the top of the league in 2 months, then he'd be stuck at 1860 Munich for at least 2 years. In other words, he wouldn't be able to regain control of the transfer rights for at least 2 years. Damn that guy. Stoffs realized he couldn't let things continue like this. He had to make things difficult for Tong Yi and stop him in his tracks. He resolved to take action. However, at the moment, he wore a friendly facade, walked over to Tong Yi, extended his right hand, gripped Tong Yi's hand tightly, and offered his sincere congratulations. Congratulations on such an important win. Tong Yi gave a slight smile and said, "Thank you." Stoff said, "Don't worry, the club will give you its full support. We need to get good results. Munich 1860 has been silent for too long. We need to make some noise, or people in Germany will forget about us. If you need help with anything in the future, just let us know, and we'll definitely back you up." Hearing this, Baker also looked at Tong Yi and said, "Yes, if you have any problems, just speak up. We'll give you our full support." Tong Yi, surprised, glanced at Stoffs and then said to both of them, "I don't need any help. I just hope you'll make sure that I have the final say on everything related to the team, just like you do now." Baker and Stoffs exchanged glances and then said, "Don't worry about that. You have the final say on team matters. We fully support you." Satisfied with their answer, Tong Yi said, "Then I'd like to impose a 3-month suspension on Torben Hoffmann, including suspension of pay, suspension of training, and suspension from playing for 3 months. I hope I have the club's support on this." Baker paused, considering the request, and remained silent. Stoffs, on the other hand, immediately spoke up. "David, is that too harsh? Shouldn't we give Torben another chance? I believe he'll appreciate the opportunity and won't cause you any more trouble." Tong Yi responded coldly, "Mr. General Manager, this isn't the first time he's tried to sabotage me and the team. Take today, for example. The team achieved such a big victory, and he's not happy and doesn't celebrate. Instead, he slanders me and our team in front of reporters. What does that tell you? He doesn't want to see Munich 1860 succeed, is that it? 045, there is no room for traitors in my team." You are listening at NovelsThe. Tong Yi said, "Icy cool, what's his problem? Does he think he's too good for our Munich 1860? Baker's face went white. This little Hoffmann was nothing. Stoffs paused, then said, "He messed up, for sure, and needs to be disciplined. But is 3 games too much? He's been around a long time, put in the work. Are we gonna create problems with the other vets if we come down too hard? Maybe we cut him some slack." Baker considered it. Stoffs had a point. Team unity was key. Tong Yi's face darkened immediately. "You see him as some senior member of the team, but he doesn't act like he's part of Munich 1860. He stabbed us in the back after a huge win. No way I can work with a guy like that." Stoff's expression turned sour. He clearly wasn't happy. He hadn't expected Tong Yi to call him out like that, right in front of everyone. He was pissed. Baker frowned too, thinking Tong Yi was pushing it. How could he be the general manager and still disrespect Stoffs like that? Tong Yi turned to Baker. "Mr. Chairman, you said I'm in charge of the team, right? That's the deal. Ouch. Could Baker say no?" Saying no would be a total slap in the face. He glanced at Stoff's increasingly dark face and said awkwardly, "Yeah, of course." Tong Yi said immediately, "Then little Hoffmann is suspended." He nodded slightly to Baker, then turned and walked away, leaving Stoffs fuming. Stoffs watched Tong Yi go, his eyes like daggers. He muttered to himself, "Just you wait, kid. Your luck's gonna run out." The next day, news of Hoffmann's 3-game suspension was all over Munich 1860. Everyone was shocked. Nobody expected Tong Yi to be so ruthless. At practice, the Munich 1860 players seemed more focused than ever. No one wanted to get on Tong Yi's bad side. Seeing the players putting in the work, Tong Yi was pleased. The players dedicated themselves to practice, and only Munich 1860 can guarantee their results. That big win against Paderborn wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a long road. There was a long way to go and a lot of challenges ahead. Tong Yi wanted to make sure his players didn't let one victory go to their heads. Honestly, that win didn't prove much. They got lucky that game. Paderborn didn't know much about them. Head coach Schubert was too cocky and underestimated them, which is why they were able to get that huge victory. The other teams in the Bundesliga aren't pushovers. If they aren't taken seriously, they can cause some damage. Seeing the players so engaged and not getting cocky off one win was a big relief to Tong Yi. Tong Yi called Steckris over. Pick up the pace and pressure them harder. What is this, a joke? Steckris nodded. Got it. Tong Yi then turned to Kruger. Work on tackling drills. That's key to our strategy, understand? Kruger nodded. Understood. Tong Yi nodded. Appreciate the hard work. Dinner's on me tonight. Tong Yi wasn't particularly close to Steckris or Kruger. They weren't enemies but they weren't friends either. They were on his staff mainly because of his mentor, Frank, so Tong Yi treated them with respect. Steckris said, sounds good. How about Chinese? Kruger nodded eagerly. Tong Yi said, no problem, Chinese it is. They smiled, turned, and headed to the field to start practice without another word. With the German Cup getting underway, the new Bundesliga 2 season was right around the corner. In a week, the 2009-2010 Bundesliga season would begin, and they were getting ready for the first game this weekend. No wonder the atmosphere at Munich 1860 practice was so intense. The Munich 1860 players trained hard, and Tong Yi watched from the sidelines, feeling good about things. The Munich 1860 players had just completed an excellent drill, and Tong Yi applauded. The team's pressure was working perfectly. The players were acting as one unit. When one player moved, the whole team moved. It was seemingly a pressure on one player holding the ball, but in reality, it was full-scale pressure. Not only was it putting pressure on the player holding the ball, but it also cut off the passing lanes and made stealing the ball and pushing forward easier. He was even intercepted without a chance to pass back. The one who had to provide support was holding the ball, but Bayerovka had excellent foot skills and was once dubbed the Bundesliga King of Extraordinaires. His ability to break through the crowd is very strong, but this time he was still intercepted. This showed that Munich 1860's overall pressure this time was very successful. After stealing the ball, Matic made a long pass to find Costa in the frontcourt, and Costa headed the ball over. It's a pity that the football was pushed out by defensive player Campbell, and good football fell to De Bruyne's feet. De Bruyne made a direct pass, and Lot quickly inserted behind Campbell. Campbell was too late to turn around, and he could only watch Lot face the goalkeeper and score with a low shot. Tong Yi was very satisfied and thought, Lauder's the real deal. He earned his time with the German national team. Lauder had been on the German national youth team and the main national team. He might have been on the fringe, but he was still a national team player. To make it to the German national team, you had to be good. In Bundesliga 2, Lauder was considered one of the top forwards. Tong Yi turned to Bruns and Winkler. Do you think Diego's heading ability is still a little lacking? That during the Paderborn game and the earlier warm-up, Tong Yi noticed that Costa needed work on his headers. He missed a lot of opportunities that he should have won. It cost Munich 1860 a lot of offensive chances. Bruns looked at Winkler and said nothing. Winkler saw Bruns looking at him, smiled wryly, and then said, Diego has huge potential. He's still a little weak right now, especially in the air. But if you give him time, he'll grow. I'm really optimistic about him. Winkler was a big fan of Tong Yi. He couldn't figure out how Tong Yi found all these talented young players. They were all teenage geniuses with unlimited potential. Tong Yi's eye for talent blew him away. Tong Yi said, I know Diego has potential, but we need a strong center right now who can win headers. Bruns and Winkler thought about it and realized Tong Yi was right. They did need that kind of center, but they had concerns. Winkler said, but if we bring in a center, what happens to Diego? He needs playing time to develop. I think he can make a big jump in a season or two. I don't think we need another center. We already have Diego. We should give him more time. Bruns nodded in agreement. There's also the money thing. We're broke. I don't think the front office is gonna give us more to spend, so we might not be able to bring anyone in. Winkler nodded, they were real issues. But Tong Yi said, we'll keep working with Diego, but I think we need to find him a good mentor. We can bring in a veteran. It'd solve our immediate tactical needs and help Diego grow faster. Bruns and Winkler's eyes lit up, that could work, but where were they going to find a veteran like that? And who would even want to come? Bruns looked at Tong Yi and asked, you already have someone in mind, don't you? Tong Yi nodded. I do. Before they could ask who it was, a commotion broke out on the field. An angry voice yelled, get out of here, you little jerk. Why are you giving me this bull crap 3-game suspension? Little Hoffman stormed onto the field, his face purple, yelling at the top of his lungs. The players stopped practicing and turned to watch the furious little Hoffman. Tong Yi frowned and watched little Hoffman stomp towards him. His eyes narrowed, sharp as knives. Little Hoffman felt his anger drain and was met with great pressure. His anger also subsided, but he still raised his neck and kicked Tong Yi, asking, why are you suspending my pay, suspension, and training? Tong Yi said calmly, I'm the coach. What I say goes. Why wouldn't I be able to? Little Hoffman's eyes widened in anger. He said, you can't do this. I'm a veteran. You weren't even in the business when I was playing for this team. Why are you treating me like this? Tong Yi said, because you sold out the team for your own selfish reasons, almost destroyed everything we built, and because you disrespected me, the head coach. Little Hoffman's eyes went wide. He roared, you traitor. You just hate me because I made you look bad in front of everyone. You're doing this out of spite. Tong Yi said coldly, leave now. You don't belong here. Little Hoffman was about to curse when Big Hoffman ran over, grabbed him, and tried to calm him down with his eyes. He said to Tong Yi, Coach, Thor didn't mean it. He's just an old-timer. Cut him some slack. He won't talk back to you again, I promise. Tong Yi said coldly, that's it. My team can't have traitors. As long as I'm here, he'll never play for me again. The Hoffman brothers went pale, their eyes filled with rage. Little Hoffman glared at Tong Yi and threatened, if you suspend me, I'm going to the Players Association to sue you. 046, you are really an old fox. You are listening at NovelsThe. The Players Union is a pretty common thing in pro sports. You might have heard of the NFL Players Association, or other athlete unions. Basically, if a country has professional soccer, they probably have one of these. The first one ever was in the UK, and it's been around for centuries. In Germany, it's called the German Professional Players Union, or sometimes just D for short. So, what do these unions actually do? Bottom line, they're there to protect the players' interests. Think of it as players banding together for strength in numbers. These unions have some serious clout, they're a big part of the sport and can influence league policies. For instance, back on July 1, 2003, Jose, who headed up the German Professional Football Players Union, said that the union would ask for an extension of the transfer deadline to help almost 200 unsigned players find jobs. They also hook up players with training facilities and gear, and even offer job training to unemployed players, helping them find work outside of soccer. Now, if Tong Yi dared to suspend someone for 3 games, that player could file a complaint with the German Professional Players Union. The union would step in and negotiate with the German Football Association, the German Professional League, and even Munich 1860, putting pressure on Tong Yi. The German Football Association and the German Professional League could even punish Tong Yi, maybe even revoke his coaching license, kicking him out of his job at Munich 1860 and potentially ruining his career in pro soccer. Plus, he could rally all the other pro players to his side, turning everyone against Tong Yi. Even if Tong Yi was the coach of Munich 1860, he wouldn't be able to get anyone to listen to him, let alone bring in new players in the transfer market. Thinking about this, little Hoffman suddenly felt a surge of confidence and looked at Tong Yi with contempt. He was betting that Tong Yi wouldn't mess with the German Professional Players Association. The thing is, ever since the German Professional Players Union got more organized, these kinds of harsh 3-game suspensions that hurt players' careers have become pretty rare in German soccer. Wouldn't doing that tick off every pro player out there? Wouldn't it mean going up against all the players' unions? Little Hoffman was feeling pretty good about himself. The other players were watching the whole thing, hanging on every word. Tong Yi clearly hadn't expected Hoffman to pull this card. He paused, thinking. Seeing Tong Yi hesitating, Hoffman felt even more smug. He stared at Tong Yi, his eyes full of mockery and disdain. That's when Big Hoffman stepped in to smooth things over. Inside, he was cheering for little Hoffman. The old players felt a surge of pride. See? He thought. That cocky Chinese guy doesn't even know what to say. The kid was clearly intimidated. Seeing Tong Yi's expression, he felt pleased. Still, he needed to give Tong Yi an out. Things shouldn't get too tense, especially not for the team's sake. Everyone could back down a little and get what they needed. No need for things to get bloody and ruin the relationship. He pretended to scold little Hoffman. Hey, watch your mouth when you talk to Coach David. You can't just run to the players' union whenever you feel like it. We can handle this ourselves. Just be quiet. Coach David is doing what he thinks is best for you. From now on, you listen to him, train hard, and play hard. After scolding little Hoffman, he turned to Tong Yi with a smile. Coach David, pay no attention to Torben. He's just blowing off steam. It'll pass. I'll have him apologize. Maybe you can call off the suspension and let him back on the team. You're a bigger man than that. Don't hold a grudge. It'll be better for everyone, you, him, and the team. Right? Hearing Big Hoffman, little Hoffman was still a little bitter, but ready to listen. He made a fuss because he wanted to get back on the team. If Tong Yi was willing to back down, he could apologize. Besides, he felt that he'd scored a victory for the Hoffmans. Plus, he had become a hero in the eyes of the old players, who felt he had earned them more respect and benefits. Bruns and Winkler breathed a sigh of relief. If things could be resolved this way, it would be great. It wouldn't hurt the team and wouldn't cause too much trouble. They couldn't help but admire Big Hoffman. Michael really is the best, they thought. Little Hoffman shot Tong Yi a contemptuous glance and mumbled insincerely, sorry. Tong Yi cut him off. No, your apology means nothing to me. If you want to go to the players' union, go ahead. I won't stop you. But let me tell you this, as long as I'm in charge here, there's no place for you on this team. Get out. The room went silent. Everyone was shocked by Tong Yi's reaction. Was he really not afraid of the trouble the players' union could cause with the German Football Association and the German Professional League? Was he really willing to go all the way with little Hoffman? Little Hoffman was stunned, his arrogance replaced by panic. Was this guy really going to make this a fight to the death? Big Hoffman's eyes widened. He stared at Tong Yi in disbelief. He hadn't expected Tong Yi to be so stubborn. Wow! The players gasped. They were seeing a different side of Tong Yi. Before, they only knew Coach Tong Yi from press conferences. He was young, sure, but he was also tough. But they had no idea he could be this tough. Little Hoffman stared at Tong Yi in shock and said angrily, "Are you really going to destroy me? Don't you realize we'll both suffer?" Tong Yi sneered, "You'll suffer, but I won't." Little Hoffman glared at Tong Yi, struggling to accept the reality. He said, "Fine. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. You want to die? Okay, let's all die." Tong Yi ignored Hoffman's rant. He just stared at him with cold eyes and said calmly, "You have a multi-year contract with us, right? A player of your caliber shouldn't even think of leaving until it expires. Our reserve team needs excellent players like you, and I hope you continue to shine on the bench." With that, Tong Yi waved Hoffman away. He told the security guards, "I don't want to see this player on the first team's training ground. Remember that." Wow! Another gasp. That was brutal. Hoffman stared at Tong Yi in disbelief, his face replaced by horror. He never thought Tong Yi would be so ruthless. Big Hoffman was also shocked. How could this be happening? He looked at Tong Yi, horrified. Was Tong Yi really going to fight to the death? Was he really going to be this childish? Hoffman finally snapped out of it and glared at Tong Yi. Fine, he said. If that's how it is, then none of us will get what we want. Hoffman turned and stormed out. He was clearly headed to the German Professional Players Union to demand justice. Watching him leave, Big Hoffman's face tightened. He turned to Tong Yi. Coach David, he said, isn't this too much? It doesn't have to be like this. Tong Yi said calmly, like I said, I won't tolerate traitors on my team. Big Hoffman's eyes narrowed. He looked at Tong Yi, but said nothing. He knew Tong Yi had made up his mind. He took a deep breath. Tong Yi ignored him and turned to his players. I want to take this opportunity to talk about team discipline. Problems within the team stay within the team. I don't want to hear about our internal affairs from the media. If I do, you'll end up like him, stuck on the reserve team until your contract expires. The players were scared. That was a harsh punishment. They now understood what little Hoffman had meant. He would be stuck on the bench, unable to play, until his contract ran out. Wasn't there 2 or 3 years left on Hoffman's contract? Hoffman was already 35. If he spent another few years on the reserve team, it would destroy his career. Wow. Another gasp. This was brutal. The coaches were shocked. They hadn't expected this young man to be so ruthless. Big Hoffman was stunned, then turned to look at Tong Yi in horror. Tong Yi said, okay, that's enough. Let's get back to training. That the players returned to practice, Bruns went up to Tong Yi. David, is this really wise? What do we do when the Players' Union and the German Football Association get involved? If you just suspend him from playing, they can't say much. But suspending his salary? That's a different story. Tong Yi said calmly, it's okay. I know what I'm doing. Bruns was anxious. This could get serious. Tong Yi said, don't worry. The suspension isn't complete. I'll still pay him the minimum wage in Munich every month. Even if he goes to the Players' Union and the German Football Association, it won't matter. Bruns' eyes widened. He stared at Tong Yi in surprise. He couldn't believe how carefully this guy had thought everything through. What an old fox. 047, the famous shooting star in Spanish football. You are listening at NovelsThe. Tong Yi moved on from the little Hoffman situation, focusing on signing new players. He clearly wanted to bring in another center. Right now, Munich 1860 only had Schaffler as a potential replacement for Costa. But Schaffler was younger, less skilled, and less experienced. Tong Yi's knack for spotting talent had already told him that Schaffler lagged far behind Costa in both potential and strength, especially when it came to headers. More importantly, Tong Yi had learned what those yellow and green bars meant after evaluating so many players. Yellow meant physical condition, fitness, strength, and injury history. Green represented experience, so Tong Yi could immediately see that Schaffler's experience was nowhere near Costa's. As it stood, Costa was the only option at center forward, which wasn't enough. Schaffler could maybe be a substitute, but only the third-string one. That's why Tong Yi was looking for a more seasoned player. Di Salvo had experience, but he lacked height and physicality. He wasn't as good as Costa at the center position. Plus, he hadn't played a real game in over a year. How could they rely on him? Getting a new center was a top priority. The good news was, it was only early August, with nearly a month left before the transfer window closed. Munich 1860 still had time. Tong Yi had 2 players in mind and planned to reach out to them. Bruns approached Tong Yi, asking, got any candidates for the center position? Yep, Tong Yi replied. Bruns perked up. Who? Want me to help make contact? Bruns was getting anxious. They were thin up front. An injury to any forward would be a disaster. They'd be left scrambling with no one to play. it was urgent, Tong Yi said. Actually, there's one guy I really want you to contact. I don't know if he'd be willing to come to Munich 1860. Bruns pressed, tell me, who is it? Tong Yi revealed, Diego Tristan, from Spain. Bruns recognized the name. Tristan had been a major force in soccer for a while. Tristan was a well-known, all-around center, 6 feet 1 inch, strong, and fast. He ran well off the ball, attacked with the ball effectively, and headed well. He was practically the perfect center. He came up through the Real Betis youth system and then moved to Mallorca. After a season with Mallorca's B team, he joined the first team. In his first La Liga season, he scored 19 goals, bursting onto the scene and exciting Spain. After that season, he almost went to Real Madrid. Real Madrid's chairman, Lorenzo Sanz, was a big fan of Tristan and planned to sign him after winning re-election in 2000. But Florentino won instead and launched his Galactico superstar plan. Florentino wanted to bring in a superstar every year, starting with Luis Figo from arch-rival Barcelona. Tristan was just an up-and-comer then, not flashy enough for Florentino. So, Tristan missed out on Real Madrid and instead joined Deportivo La Coruña, who had just beaten Real Madrid and Barcelona for the La Liga title, joining the Super Depayer wave. In his first season with Deportivo, he replaced the injured Dutch forward Makai and became the team's main striker. He scored 23 goals in total, including 19 in the league, firmly establishing himself ahead of Makai. In his second season, he scored 32 goals, including 5 in the Champions League, 6 in the Copa del Rey, and 21 in the league. He won the La Liga Golden Boot that season and became Spain's hottest forward. Almost everyone thought Tristan and Raúl would become the Spanish national team's unstoppable duo. But Tristan got injured during the 2002 World Cup, and his career took a turn. In the 2002-2003 season, he was still recovering from the injury, and Makai took back the starting center role. Makai had a great season, winning both the La Liga Golden Boot and the European Golden Boot with 29 goals. Although Tristan was still affected by injuries and got less playing time, he still scored 19 goals, 9 in the league, 4 in the Champions League, and 6 in the Copa del Rey. After that season, Makai left for Bayern Munich and Tristan returned to the starting lineup. He only missed 8 of 56 games across all competitions, but only scored 13 goals. His scoring rate and form were rapidly declining. After that, Tristan faded away. For the next 3 seasons, he scored 8, 9, and 11 league goals. When his contract expired, he returned to Mallorca on a free transfer but had a disappointing half-season, with 0 goals and 15 appearances. He was released after 6 months. He then went to Livorno, Italy, scoring only 1 goal. Last season, he moved to England and joined West Ham United in the Premier League. He played 17 times and scored 3 goals. He was now a free agent, and West Ham wasn't planning to renew his contract. Tristan's career was a classic case of a shooting star. He peaked early in La Liga and then declined. His level had dropped significantly in recent years. Bruns asked, what's his situation now? Which team is he with? What's his current status? Bruns only knew Tristan from his glory days and didn't know anything about his recent performance. Tong Yi explained, he's a veteran bouncing around, not really making an impact. Last season, he played for West Ham United, but he only scored 3 goals. West Ham isn't renewing his contract, so he's a free agent. It should be easier to sign him, right? Bruns frowned. Tristan didn't sound promising. He asked, how much do you know about his current ability? Tong Yi paused. He hadn't seen Tristan play recently, so he couldn't use his eye of bull. But he remembered that Tristan went back to Spain that season, joining Addis in the second division, and scored 8 goals. He thought Tristan might retire after that season. The Spanish second division couldn't be that different from the German second division. If Tristan joined Munich 1860, he could be a rotational forward. Tong Yi remembered that last season, Costa had only scored 9 goals for Albacete in the second division. So, the 2 players should be at a similar level. Tristan also had more experience, which Munich 1860 needed. Tong Yi replied, he scored 3 goals in the Premier League with limited playing time, so he must still have something left. He should be able to play in the Bundesliga for us. Besides, we mainly want his experience and for him to mentor Costa. I think he's a good fit. Bruns thought about it. Tristan had been a well-rounded center, capable of holding the ball, attacking, running off the ball, and playing in counterattacks. Although his physical ability and speed had declined with age, his experience in counterattacks and positioning could really help Costa. Plus, Costa could improve his heading skills with Tristan's help. Costa had also come up through the Spanish soccer system, so his style should mesh well with Tristan's. Maybe Tristan was a good option after all, he pondered, then said, if you think he can do it, then we'll contact him. He might not be interested in us, though. There should be other teams after him. Tong Yi said, it might be tough to sign him. I heard he wants to go back to Spain, and a few second division teams have offered him contracts. Addis seems closest to signing him. Bruns said, we have to act fast, or we'll miss out. Tong Yi agreed. That was why he had told Bruns so much. Tong Yi said, right, we need to move quickly. Bruns felt relieved. Tong Yi had set him up, but he didn't mind. He immediately said, what's Tristan's situation? Is he still in England, or has he gone back to Spain? Tong Yi replied, he should still be in England, at West Ham. You should contact his agent first and then go to West Ham. Bruns nodded, okay, I'll take care of it. You handle the team. Get ready. The first game of the season is coming up, and we can't afford to lose, you can't let us lose. Tong Yi said, don't worry, I'm here for the team. Don't worry about the league game. We might have some problems, but believe me, we'll win. Munich 1860 will win. Bruns nodded firmly, I believe you. Then, Bruns said goodbye and went to work on signing Tristan. Tong Yi turned his attention to another player, a very young one. He was still looking for reinforcements because they were lacking in several positions. 048, Poaching a future world-class left-back. You are listening at NovelsThe. The sky was a drab gray, spitting rain, and Sabina Street felt eerily silent. From the Wittsteinplatz U1 station to Sabina Street, Tong Yi barely saw a soul. It was dead quiet. A prominent, old-fashioned church stood adjacent to Sabina Street. A 15-minute walk south from the church brought Tong Yi to a typical, older neighborhood, the home of Bayern Munich's headquarters. Tong Yi surveyed the area. It seemed like an upscale community. The real estate couldn't be cheap. He soon arrived at Bayern Munich's headquarters. Looking at the two buildings before him, Tong Yi thought, definitely more impressive than Munich 1860. One building sported a sign for fan services, the other, sports and strategic operations. A passageway and the entrance to the underground parking garage separated the two buildings. A middle-aged man in a blue shirt and black pants stood near the passageway. Spotting Tong Yi, he immediately approached, extending his right hand. David, welcome to Sabener Strasse. I'm Christian Nerlinger. Frankly, Tong Yi was surprised. He hadn't expected Bayern Munich's trusted sporting director to greet him in person. He knew a little about the thinning-haired, balding man before him. Nerlinger was a former pro, a product of Bayern Munich's youth academy. He'd played 8 years for Bayern's first team, a recognized star. After retirement, he studied international business at Munich Business School and returned to Bayern as a manager. This year, his boss, Ulrich Hoeneß, was promoted to general manager. Nerlinger had stepped into his role in July, becoming the team's sporting director. Tong Yi gripped Nerlinger's hand firmly. Nice to meet you, Mr. Nerlinger. After a brief exchange, Nerlinger said, come on, let me show you around our training facility. It's an honor, Tong Yi replied. Nerlinger led Tong Yi through the passageway and into the training complex behind the buildings on the ground floor. This building is our Bayern Munich office building, Nerlinger explained. The top floor houses the coaches and senior management's offices. Behind us are our training grounds. We have 6 full-sized pitches and 1 smaller one. Our first team usually trains on the 2 closest to us. In fact, they're out there now. Following Nerlinger's gesture, Tong Yi saw the 2 nearest pitches. One was shrouded by a curtain, likely for closed practices. The other was teeming with players. A closer look confirmed they were indeed Bayern Munich's first-team stars. Watching them train diligently, Tong Yi sighed. Impressive. He took a quick scan of the players using his eye of the talent scout. Their abilities were generally above 150, potential around 160. Even Robin and Ribery boasted stats above 180, intimidating. It highlighted how far Munich 1860 had fallen. Nerlinger noticed the shock in Tong Yi's eyes and smiled, pleased. Bayern Munich was a top club in Germany, a world-class powerhouse. Tong Yi's reaction was only natural. Nerlinger then said, David, follow me. The pitches back here are for our Bayern Munich second team. Bayern Munich's second team was essentially their U23 squad. Though labeled U23, there were some talented 16 and 17-year-olds in the mix. Bayern Munich too competed in the 3. Liga, the third tier of German football. Hearing this, Tong Yi refocused and followed Nerlinger to the second team's training ground. The players' training turned to stare, curious. The second team coach immediately barked, what are you looking at? Focus on training. If you don't want to work, say so now, and forget about playing this weekend. The Bayern Munich 2 players immediately straightened up and resumed training. The coach ignored Tong Yi and Nerlinger, continuing the session as if nothing had happened. A group standing near the field approached. Nerlinger introduced them as Bayern Munich's general manager, Hoeneß, and youth coach Kurt Niedermeyer. Tong Yi extended his hand, and they exchanged pleasantries. The gray-haired Hoeneß smiled. Welcome to Sabener Strasse. Thank you, Tong Yi replied. It's a pleasure to be here. Hoeneß smiled. We've considered your loan request carefully. We still have a few questions, so we invited you to discuss this player's future in person. Tong Yi had already spotted the young, dark-skinned kid next to Niedermeyer. This kid was the one he was after. He wanted to bring him to Munich 1860. Tong Yi smiled at the boy. Nice to meet you, David. The kid, resembling a younger version of Alex from Family Ties, replied nervously, it's nice to meet you too. He kept glancing at Tong Yi. Curiosity etched on his face. Yes, the young player Tong Yi coveted was none other than David Alaba, the future Austrian superstar. Alaba's curiosity stemmed from the fact that this Chinese coach was so interested in him and wanted to bring him in on loan. When he heard the news, Alaba was shocked and confused. Why did this coach think so highly of him? However, Alaba was also eager to meet this Chinese coach in Munich and see what kind of person he was. Ultimately, Alaba wanted to play in the 2. Bundesliga with 1860 Munich. He was still stuck in the 3. Liga with Bayern Munich 2, a step below the 2. Bundesliga. He was itching to make the jump. Hoeneß turned to Tong Yi. We'd like to hear your assessment of David. If we loan him to you, what kind of training plan do you have in mind? You should know, we value him highly at Bayern Munich. Tong Yi nodded. He understood perfectly. I'm well aware of David's potential and ability, Tong Yi replied. He's incredibly talented and could become a world-class defender. I'm very optimistic about him. Everyone was surprised. They hadn't expected Tong Yi to praise Alaba so highly. Even Alaba was taken aback. Did this coach really think so highly of him? Or was it just flattery? Tong Yi continued, our team's interest in signing David stems from his potential, and more importantly, his current ability. I know that with his potential, his future lies with Bayern Munich. However, his current abilities don't guarantee him a spot on Bayern Munich's first team. Even in the next 4 or 5 years, he might struggle to break into the starting 11. The competition within Bayern Munich is too intense. Hoeneß and the others nodded. Tong Yi's assessment was fair, not exaggerated. Even Alaba had to admit that Tong Yi was right. He couldn't confidently claim he'd surpass those world-class players in the next 4 or 5 years and become Bayern Munich's starting left-back. Tong Yi went on, however, staying with Bayern Munich too won't help him improve. The 3. Liga isn't challenging enough, and you know that. Hoeneß glanced at Nerlinger and Niedermeyer, who exchanged a look and nodded in agreement. They acknowledged that the third tier wasn't ideal for Alaba's development. Tong Yi, sensing an opportunity, pressed his advantage. So, at this stage, loaning David out to the Bundesliga to hone his skills is the best thing for him. Alaba nodded instinctively. He agreed. He looked at Hoeneß and Niedermeyer, his eyes full of hope. Hoeneß and the others deliberated before he said, "What you're saying makes sense. To be honest, many teams have offered to loan David, but there is a reason we haven't." "Do you know why David hasn't gone out on loan?" Tong Yi frowned and shook his head slightly. "I'm not sure." "Why?" Hoeneß replied, "As you know, at his age, David needs playing time and experience. But those other teams can't guarantee him that. So why would we loan him out? We might as well keep him with the second team and play him in the third division." Alaba turned to Tong Yi, wanting to gauge how little he was worth in the Chinese coach's eyes. The corners of Tong Yi's mouth lifted slightly. As he anticipated, Tong Yi said, "Mr. Hoeneß, rest assured, I can guarantee David playing time. I think you've seen the loan request I sent you. I proposed a 3-year loan period. If I didn't truly value him and want to develop him, would I offer a 3-year loan?" Hoeneß and the others nodded. They had noticed. Alaba's eyes widened as he stared at Tong Yi. Tong Yi continued, "Our current starting left back, Holba, is a converted left midfielder, only switched this season. He's good on offense, but defensively he's rough, and he commits a lot of fouls. That means he won't play every game. At least half the opportunities will fall to David. I believe that with David's potential, he'll be our starting left back by next season. Meaning, he'll be our starting left back for the next 2 years. And I believe that by the end of the loan, David's ability will skyrocket. And when he returns to Bayern Munich, he might even become your starting left back." Tong Yi's pitch was compelling, making them consider the possibilities. They weren't worried about Alaba not wanting to return to Bayern Munich in 3 years. Which player in Germany could refuse Bayern Munich? The three nodded, their minds made up, but Hoeneß said, "We're willing to loan David to you, but there's one major issue. If you can't resolve this, we won't be able to let David go." 049, The Loss of Young Talent in German Football. You are listening at NovelsThe. Tong Yi's heart jumped. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. Horn explained, "David just turned 17 this June. German professional football regulations stipulate that players have to be 18 to play for a professional team in a pro league. So, even if we loan him to you, he won't be eligible to play in the Bundesliga." Araba's face fell, his eyes losing their sparkle. Tong Yi frowned, studying Araba's reaction. The rule Horn mentioned was valid. The German League and FA did have a regulation preventing players under 18 from playing in professional leagues for pro teams. Supposedly, it was to protect young players from the intense physical demands of the league before their bodies were fully developed, which could lead to injuries. Experience showed these injuries were often serious and difficult to recover from, sometimes even ending careers. This was a reason why it seemed like so many young talents flamed out. Honestly, Tong Yi thought the league and FA had good intentions, but the policy was impractical and hampered German football's progress. It risked losing young talent. Actually, it was already happening. Other top European leagues didn't have the same restrictions. A 16-year-old talent from a German academy couldn't play professionally in Germany, but could in England, France, Italy, or Spain. To get that chance, they'd leave for other countries, often for cheap or even free, because they only had youth contracts back home. In 1999, Walls left Schalke's youth setup for Arsenal at 16. In 2005, Ziller, also 16, went from Cologne to Manchester United. In 2009, 17-year-old Mustafi left Hamburg's academy for Everton, and Tong Yi remembered Gnabry leaving Stuttgart for Arsenal at 16, and all these players would later play for the German national team. Add in other talented players who didn't quite reach that level, and you could see how much talent German football had lost over the years. Most of these players left at 16 or 17, just when they were ready to move up from the youth team, but couldn't get into the first team in Germany. Tong Yi frowned. This rule is backwards. If it keeps up, German football will bleed young talent. which is terrible for its development. Horn and the others just shrugged, looking helpless. Niedermeyer thought Tong Yi was exaggerating. "Aren't you being a bit dramatic?" Niedermeyer countered. "Sure, we lose some players, but is it really because of the age limit? Those guys probably couldn't cut it in the first place. They just found another path. Even if we lose a few, it's not a huge deal. Our youth system is solid. We can always develop more." Tong Yi shook his head, thinking the guy was short-sighted. Maybe a lot of Germans felt the same, which is why they weren't more concerned. Tong Yi decided not to argue. Time would tell. Right now, Germany didn't feel any pain. Their youth national teams were packed with players from German club academies. They figured the best players stayed home, but Tong Yi knew better. In a few years, Germany's youth national teams would look very different. More and more talented players from foreign clubs would join, eventually making up half or more of the roster. Then they'd realize how serious the problem was. Tong Yi remembered it was 2018 when they finally woke up and did something about it. That summer, a transfer rocked the German soccer world. Red Bull Salzburg bought 16-year-old Unterhaching striker Adeyemi for €3.50 million. The Munich-born, mixed-race forward had just won the Fritz-Walter Medal, awarded by the German FA to the best player in his age group. Many German clubs, including Bayern Munich, wanted him. But due to the German age limit, he couldn't register or play professionally, so he went to Red Bull Salzburg. Soon after, he was loaned to Liefering, a second-division Austrian team. In his second season there, the 17-year-old scored 8 goals and had 7 assists in 13 games, becoming a standout player. In 2020, he was selected for the German national team at age 18. There were tons of players like him. Liefering alone had 3 young German players born after 2000. And that was just one team in Austria. Austria and Turkey became popular destinations for 16 and 17-year-old German players. They could get pro experience faster there, giving them more opportunities to grow and surpass their peers back home. Soon, Germany's youth national teams would be dominated by these young Germans with pro league experience. Adeyemi's situation led Unterhaching's chairman, Schwab, to call on the German league and FA to lift the age limit, so Germany could retain its young talent. Otherwise, more and more young players would leave and potentially choose to represent other countries like Austria or Turkey, which would be a huge blow to German football. Then came Moukoko, the Borussia Dortmund prodigy, and other 15-year-old talents, which finally pushed the German league and FA to make changes. This year they reformed the age to 17. The problem was still serious, but Tong Yi wasn't going to be the lone voice of reason. It was too exhausting. He didn't argue with Niedermeyer. Maybe. But that's not what we're here to talk about. It's about David. Horn agreed. Exactly. That's what we need to solve. Do you have an idea? Tong Yi paused, then said, "Isn't the youngest player to ever appear in German professional football Dortmund's Nuri Sahin?" René and Nellinger exchanged surprised glances. They hadn't expected that. Yes. Nellinger confirmed. Tong Yi continued, "Didn't he play for Dortmund's first team when he was 16? Not 17 yet, right? Am I remembering that correctly?" Horn looked at Nellinger, his eyes questioning. Tong Yi rolled his eyes. Horn's acting was terrible. He obviously knew this already, but was pretending to ask Nellinger, so obvious. Nellinger pretended to think for a moment. "You're right. Sahin played in the German league for Dortmund at 16 years and 355 days, to be exact." Tong Yi's lips curled into a smile. He had his way in. He'd already figured out a solution before he arrived. Tong Yi remembered Alaba playing for Bayern Munich's second team in the third-tier league this season, making his pro debut. The third-tier league was part of the German professional football system. Before 2018, players under 18 weren't allowed to play in the third league. Alaba's situation with Bayern Munich's second team was similar to Sahin's. The German league and FA had an exception to the age limit. Players in the German FA's top-level youth teams could play in the German league at age 17. Sahin fell into this category, and so did Alaba. Besides Sahin, players under 18 had played in the German league before, like Ogo in 2004, Castro in 2005, Vrancic in 2007, and Hartmann and Lauter in 2008, all 17 at the time. Alaba was also in the German FA's top-level youth team. He was 17 years and 255 days old when he played for Bayern Munich's second team this season, so Tong Yi wasn't worried about it at all. Since Bayern Munich planned to have Alaba play in the league this season, they already knew all this. They were probably testing Tong Yi to see how serious he was about Alaba. Now they knew he was genuinely interested. Horn, Nellinger, and the others were satisfied that Tong Yi would develop Alaba well. René looked at Nellinger, nodded, and said to Tong Yi, "Okay, Tong Yi, we'll loan Alaba to you. We just need to discuss the specific details." Tong Yi nodded, thrilled. He was finally getting Alaba. 050, my mentor is David Tong. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Tong Yi initially wanted to loan Alaba for 3 years, but Bayern Munich wasn't going for it. In Tong Yi's mind, Alaba didn't really break into Bayern Munich's starting lineup until the 2011-2012 season. Before that, he'd been loaned to Hoffenheim in 2010-2011. Bayern Munich thought 3 years was way too long. They were, however, open to letting Munich 1860 help develop him. Their counteroffer was this: Munich 1860 could buy 50% of Alaba's rights for €1 million, with Bayern Munich buying him back after 3 years. It was a pretty sweet deal, but Munich 1860 just didn't have that kind of cash. Bayern Munich would only loan Alaba to Munich 1860 for 1 season initially. After some back and forth, they agreed to a 2-season loan. Tong Yi was happy with that. Munich 1860 got Alaba on a free loan, but had to cover 50% of his salary. Tong Yi found out Alaba was making €750 a week, roughly €3,300 a month, which came out to less than €40,000 a year. So, for 2 years, Munich 1860 would only be paying €40,000, a steal. Even if Alaba signed a new contract next year, it wouldn't break the bank. Tong Yi was pumped. That same day, Tong Yi brought Alaba from Bayern's training ground to Munich 1860s. Even though Munich 1860 and Bayern Munich were city rivals, they did a fair amount of player business together. Bayern had even sold players to Munich 1860 in the past. Around 2000, they'd even teamed up to build the Allianz Arena, so this player move wasn't a big deal. Tong Yi introduced Alaba to the team and then put Kruger in charge of showing him the ropes, helping him get up to speed with the team's strategy. When Holba saw Alaba, he felt a wave of anxiety. Last season, he'd felt like he had no future at 1860 Munich, stuck behind Bayerofka and the others. He'd asked to be transferred to his old coach, Kurtz, who surprised him by saying he wanted him to switch to left back, saying the team needed someone there. Suddenly, Holba felt relevant again and was stoked. He worked hard to adjust to the new position, determined not to let Kurtz down. And Kurtz was right, he had potential at left back. Before long, he was a regular starter. This season, he felt valued by the new coach, Tong Yi, which he appreciated, but now, Tong Yi had brought in Alaba from Bayern Munich. He instantly felt like he must have screwed something up in practice, making Tong Yi unhappy. He was stressed and worried. Was Tong Yi going to replace him? He was still new to the position, and his confidence wasn't sky high. He was determined to work hard and impress Tong Yi, but the harder he tried, the more mistakes he made in training, and he ended up having a really bad session. After training, he felt defeated. He felt like he didn't belong at Munich 1860. He even considered transferring to another team. He was a wreck, caught up in his fears and doubts. Tong Yi noticed something was off with Holba. He pulled him aside. "Jose, what's up with you today? Something going on at home? You were totally out of it during practice." Holba mumbled, "Sorry, coach. Tong Yi studied him. This guy had a tough look, and played fiercely on the field. He seemed like a hard case, so why did he look so timid now?" "Total role reversal," Tong Yi said. "I know what's going on. You think I brought Alaba in to replace you, right?" Holba's face fell, and he thought, "Figures." Tong Yi shook his head. "You're overthinking this. You've got skills. Maybe you don't have Alaba's potential, but right now, you're just as good. And you can play in the Bundesliga. I believe in you. Stop getting in your own head." train hard, and compete. Don't let your insecurity screw you up, got it? Holba was stunned, he was floored that Tong Yi thought so highly of him. No coach had ever said anything like that before, not even Kurtz. He hadn't gotten much praise in the past. He looked at Tong Yi, excited and happy, tears welling up. A rush of emotion hit him, like he'd die for this guy. He stammered, "Boss, you really think that highly of me?" Tong Yi locked eyes with him, "Absolutely. Why else would I make you the starting left back? Believe in yourself. You can be the best left back, even in the Bundesliga. But you have to have confidence. If you don't believe in yourself, you're screwed." Holba, eyes shining, nodded firmly. "I will, boss. Thanks for believing in me. I won't let you down, I swear." Holba clenched his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. Tong Yi clapped him on the shoulder. "I believe you. Now go train hard." Holba nodded, but he still had some doubts. Tong Yi saw it. "Alaba is here to give us some depth at your position. Maybe you don't realize it, but you've actually been playing pretty well there. But there's one big problem." Holba tensed up. "What's that?" Tong Yi said, "I'm happy with your performance, especially on offense. You used to be a winger, after all. But you're still new to being a left back, and you're still learning. You foul way too much." Holba thought about it, hanging his head. Tong Yi went on, "Your defensive skills and experience are lacking. You rely too much on hustle and never giving up. You always outrun your opponents and make tough saves. You hardly ever use technique to block, intercept, or steal." Holba nodded. "He did foul a lot." He got nervous. "So how do I fix it?" "What should I do?" Tong Yi said, "Actually, don't change anything. Keep playing the way you do. You haven't been playing this position since you were a kid. You've only been doing it for half a year. You haven't had time to develop those skills. You can work on the skills, but the most important thing is experience. And that takes time." Holba nodded, agreeing with Tong Yi. But he was still anxious. Tong Yi gestured for him to relax. "The way you play is fine. It fits our system. Just keep learning in the games, and building your defensive experience. You'll have to work harder than other guys to learn and improve. Your fouls are tuition. But don't make the same mistake twice. Think about how to defend without fouling. Eventually, you'll make enough mistakes, play enough games, and get enough experience to take your game to the next level." Holba perked up. He really felt like Tong Yi believed in him, and he was grateful. He vowed to remember Tong Yi's words, and improve as quickly as possible. Now he understood why Tong Yi brought in Alaba. He was sure to pick up yellow and red cards, resulting in suspensions. They'd need another capable left back to step up. Alaba was there for that. Holba was even more grateful to Tong Yi. He could have easily replaced him, but instead he was giving him a chance to grow. Tong Yi was his mentor. Holba bowed to Tong Yi, thanking him. "Thank you, boss. I'll work harder. I won't let you down, I swear." Tong Yi smiled and patted his shoulder. "Okay. Go get some rest, train hard tomorrow, and get ready for the weekend's league game. We can't afford to screw up the first game." "Got it," Holba said. "Got it." That the first game of the 2009 to 2010 Bundesliga season was just around the corner. In 2 days, 1860 Munich would host Koblenz at home. The Koblenz team was already preparing for the away game and had begun training.